Hey, I'm Alex in Los Angeles.
And this is Karan in San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self discovery through a shared love of film. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through the three of our favorite movies. We won't be sharing our list in advance, so you'll get to really witness our reactions live. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you just the way they've been to us. So, with that, Alex, tell our listeners what's the topic for today.
Yeah, the movie topic we chose today is movies that shaped our relationship with our siblings. And we chose this topic because, first of all, both of us have siblings. Both of us have siblings that also enjoyed movies like we did. And we have a lot of great memories of specific films, specific moments where we really bonded over these films with our siblings. And to this day, still have memories that are tied to those experiences. And I think what we should probably do first is give a brief background on our siblings. So I'll start. Again, I grew up in Boston. I have two siblings, both of them younger than me, and both of them girls. So I'm the oldest, and I'm also the only child who's a male in our family. My oldest of the two younger sisters is 2 years younger than me, and the other sister is 5 years younger than me. So we all grew up very close as kids, and like I said, raised on movies and TV, and a lot of our experiences together were around media. And we're going to get into some of those today. So yeah, Karan, why don't you talk about your sibling?
Yeah, so I have one younger sister. She's about 5.5 younger to me. And similar to you, we grew up on movies, with movies, whether it was renting movies out or going to the theater. And over the years, our bond has interestingly, I think, evolved with the movies that we watch, the kind of movies we love. And as I was preparing this list, I sort of felt like our choices in movies in some ways mirrors our relationship, which is pretty interesting. We are also big food people, and I she's one of the people that I really admire in my life. So hopefully that comes across as well through the movies that I picked here. So Alex, for you, tell us a little bit more about the framework that you had in mind as you were approaching this topic.
Yeah, so what I thought back on was really the movie, because we watched a lot of movies, like I said, growing up, the three of us. And I was thinking back to like what movies did we watch that we enjoyed together, that we still enjoy together today, that we still, say each time we see it, even if we're not together, oh, I just watched so and so right now, texting each other back and forth about these movies, still quoting it to each other. Some of these movies also I felt were like, what were the ones that feel like they're ours in a way? Like these aren't movies that we bonded over that are maybe not super well known or well liked or something, but for us they were something that we still enjoy to this day. And I think that's what how I approached this really is like that was my framework. Great.
Yeah.
So do you want to kick us off and start with your number three?
Sure. So my number three kind of goes way back to our childhood, and maybe goes way back to movie history as well a little bit, but it's Mary Poppins from 1964. Most people have probably watched this movie, but the IMDb description says, in the turn of the century, London, a magical nanny employs music and adventure to help two neglected children become closer to their father. Directed by Robert Stevenson, and obviously starring Julie Andrews, Dick Van Dyke, etc., and based on the book by P.L. Travers. So this movie is on the list because as I was thinking about the list and thinking about what is my oldest memory as kids of us watching something on TV and really being sort of enveloped in the magic of the movie and the magic of movies at large. And that's why this movie is on the list, because it did that to us. And unlike many movies that probably did that to us during our childhood, this movie for some reason has stayed with us. Like every time we hang out together, we do find a way to watch a little bit of this movie, if not the whole thing. And there's something about, obviously, the literal magic of Mary Poppins. So things like, rum punch, we still sort of utter that to each other and, smile about that. It's sort of our thing, probably a forgotten moment. Also, because the two of us always had sore throats and we loved different kinds of cough syrup. So it really spoke to us. This is so weird. um, and then we also both have a huge love for music. The two of us had a bit of a band of sorts where we both sang, and my sister played a ton of instruments. So this was probably a first overt musical that we watched, even though growing up in India, every movie is sort of a musical. So we were obviously singing and dancing to a lot of that. But this sort of really felt like, oh, the people who are on the screen are singing the songs. And it sort of spoke to us in that way as well. The music obviously is phenomenal of this movie. And then there's something also about how the household mirrored our household in some ways, not all the ways, but in some ways. My dad, now retired general in the army, I wouldn't equate him to Mr. Banks, but definitely a man who is a little bit on the rules and regulation side, very loving to us and all of that, of course, and encouraging in all ways. But I think we saw some parallels there as kids, even though we were so little, and even though we didn't really speak of it at that time, and we have talked about this growing as we've grown up. But there's something about the man of the house, if you will, and how sometimes dads or even mothers can get too lost in their work. And not that they don't love their children, but children can be a little bit lost in that sense. And I think this movie kind of really navigates that whole bond between parents and children, especially fathers and children, really beautifully, and how the two siblings support each other in those times, and not that the two of us have gone through anything super crazy of that kind, but I don't know, it sort of spoke to us in that sense as well. And then the last thing I would say is just going back to the magic of movie making. I think it planted a seed in our minds of like, yeah, this is something that people do. They come together, they tell a story, and all these effects and all this movie magic stuff. At a very early age, I think we started to understand that this is not real, but it does feel like real. And how magical and cool is that? So, and that's why Mary Poppins is on there. And yeah, I'm sure you watched this, Alex. So curious what you think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've definitely seen Mary Poppins. It was one of those movies that was on constant rotation as well growing up. I can't remember the first time. It's one of those movies I can't remember the first time I even saw it because it's sort of there. Definitely enjoyed it. We were a Disney household, more towards the animated films than the live action ones, though obviously this is a combination of both. But it's a movie that too I've saw a lot as a kid, didn't see for a very long time, revisited again in college, and then maybe seen it maybe like 10 years ago. So only seen it a couple times as an adult. And it's definitely still, I appreciate it in like a much different way for how it is able to still be that magical and really speak about so many of these very adult things. I mean, it really is a movie about a lot of adult themes, but that kids can take in. And a lot of things you were saying too, it's like, yeah, all these things are there, but as a child, it doesn't get in the way. It doesn't feel like an adult movie, but a lot of the themes that it talks about are also about how kids need to kind of be adults when adults need to be kids. It's very interesting. It definitely, my view of how I look at that film changed as I got older, but again, it only grew in appreciation for it. I mean, it's definitely a fantastic film that, just, I think will never be forgotten. I feel like it's more like a Wizard of Oz kind of thing where it's always there now. Kids growing up. I mean, I don't have kids, but I'm sure if I did, like, they'd be watching Mary Poppins and having those same kind of experiences that you and your sister had. Do you remember the first time you saw it or not?
No, I don't actually specifically. I would think I was probably like in like 7, 8 years old, maybe, or 10 years old. So my sister was like really, really small, but yet because she was so musical and we really got along and were really good friends right at the get-go, I remember her laughing and smiling, but yeah, super vague memories around that.
Yeah, do you know how you would have been, was it on TV a lot for you? Was it like a rental? I'm just curious on
Rental,
how rental. Yeah.
video rental, and I think through my mom really, that she really knew that, oh yeah, this is like a must-watch set
Nice.
of, movie musicals that speak to kids, but are, like you said, also speak to the whole family. So I'm pretty sure my parents watched this movie with us as well, several times growing up, and even now, really. So yeah, I'm glad that you really love this movie. I can't wait to hear your number three.
Yeah, I think we're going from a film, Mary Poppins, that both of us have seen countless times, where most of our listeners have probably seen Mary Poppins, to a film, my number three, that I'd be surprised if you've seen. So we'll see. That I think is probably something that a lot of our listeners haven't seen, and hopefully after this episode they'll go out and watch. It's a movie from 1994 called Clifford, directed by Paul Flattery, starring Martin Short and Charles Grodin. The plot of this film is a bratty 10-year-old boy is obsessed with visiting a dinosaur-themed amusement park. His uptight uncle takes the wily Tyke in for a week and barely lives to regret it. And the premise of this film, which I have to explain a little bit, is yes, it's about a kid, 10-year-old boy who's like his bratty boy, but that boy is played by Martin Short, who is 40 years old at the time. And the interesting thing about this performance and the tone of this film as well is that that's not the joke. It's not like those Wayans brothers, like White Chicks or Little Man, where the joke is it's a grown man playing something that he's not, or those Adam Sandler movies where he's playing, in drag or what have you. The movie plays it totally straight. It's not about the fact that it's a grown man playing a boy. And I stumbled across this movie on television. It bombed in the theaters, so it's probably very cheap and easy to pick up the licensing rights for. It was Comedy Central. We're a family with cable, and I watched a lot of cable TV growing up. Comedy Central was one of my favorite channels, even as a young teen. So this would have been like mid '90s, and just absolutely like love the movie. It really nailed my sense of humor, very weird and offbeat, but with this heart in it too. And I immediately, like every time it was on, I'd watch it, and then I exposed my older of my two sisters to it, and she immediately fell in love with it too. And it's our sense of humors are very similar, maybe a little different than the average American suburban kid. At the time, a little more sarcastic, a bit odd. We had consumed a lot of the same media on television, especially old sitcoms, a lot of British television. So we kind of bonded over the oddness of this film, very offbeat humor of what this movie was. We both then got to have a similar love for Martin Short, love his Jiminy Glick, all different performances in all these different films. And to this day we're still quoting Clifford to each other. Unfortunately, when Charles Grodin passed earlier this year, we both would watch the film and would send memes back and forth about it. And it's a movie that some people have heard of, some people have seen, but every time it comes up in kind of a conversation or I have a chance to pitch it to someone, I just do think it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but it's such an odd movie in terms of what they tried to do with it, that it just, again, it feels like a secret handshake between the two of us. Really, like my older sister more so even than my younger one for this film. That it's not, again, it's a movie that no one really has seen, that we both really enjoy and can have that bond over. So I'm curious if you've seen or even heard of this film.
Oh yeah, heard of it, seen it in bits and pieces, but a while ago. So I feel like I should go and watch this movie again. And the reason is because we as a family, and especially my sister and my mom, are huge Martin Short.
Oh, nice.
People. And I think our entry gateway to Martin Short was through Steve Martin, which makes a lot of sense. So yeah, a lot of these movies, Father of the Bride, and even the Netflix special that they did a couple of years ago, we watched it so many times. So yeah, we love both of them in different ways and together. So yeah, I want to kind of go back and watch this movie just for that reason. I'm curious, was it just a sense of humor part that kind of bonded the two of you over this movie? Or is there something about the story or the subject matter of this movie as well that kind of touched you or spoke to you in a way?
I think it was more on the the oddness of that approach of, again, it's a grown man playing a boy, but the movie is not mentioning that. None of the jokes are about that. And you really do get lost in this performance of him, as you really do think of him as a 10-year-old boy. And the oddness of that, I think, is what, for me, like initially attracted me to this film when I came across it, as you stumble across something on cable, it's in the middle of the movie. You kind of like, what the hell is this? And then you start watching it. That's what grabbed me initially. And that's also what grabbed her into it. And I think it would have been something easy where if we didn't share that sense of humor or reverence, someone could easily be watching this for 5 minutes and like, what the hell is this? This is so bad. Like it was one of the, at the time, worst reviewed films. I think they filmed it 4 years before it even got released because people were like, what are we going to do with this thing? Like it was just such an aberration. But that is, I think, what I like about it, and what she likes about it as well, that it is something that's kind of different, offbeat, and not really well loved or talked about much, that we can kind of share that admiration.
I love that. I love that. All right. So is it time for my number two?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. So my number two is Bend It Like Beckham from 2002. The IMDb description says, two ambitious girls, despite their parents' wishes, had their hearts set on careers in professional soccer. Directed by Gurinder Chadha, starring Keira Knightley, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Parminder Nagra, Anupam Kher, who's a big Bollywood character actor. So yeah, so this movie is on this list because I was thinking hard about growing up with Bollywood movies. Is there a Bollywood movie that we really bonded on? And to be honest, I really couldn't think of any. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we watched Bollywood movies in the theaters as they were released. And because of our age gap, 5.5 years, which is quite significant, my experience of watching movies in the theater was different from hers when we were both living with our parents. And then when I went away to college and I would come back and visit, the movies that we watched were sort of, the big flashy blockbuster movie that was playing at that time. So yes, we loved it and enjoyed those movies, but there wasn't much anything deeper, to kind of build on or bond over the years. So that's why there really isn't a movie that I could think of. I'm sure there is one, but I couldn't think of it. However, this movie, which is not a Bollywood movie, it's a British movie, kept coming back to my mind again and again. And I think the reason is this was the first time we saw an Indian family depicted in like a Western movie. There are many, many other movies out there, but this is the first time we'd seen that. And that kind of spoke to us in a weird way because A, we'd never seen it. B, growing up with my aunt, who's my dad's sister, her and her husband living in Switzerland and us visiting them and doing Europe trips and such was a big part of our growing up. But we never really seen that in the movie. So kind of seeing that was a good parallel in a way to our own lives, that, oh yeah, this is our life as well. And here it is being depicted on the screen. So that was sort of cool. And then even though I think our family, I would not call it whatever quote unquote typically Indian means is. And this family in many ways is that, where, the girl is expected to get married quickly and, your dreams and ambitions can sort of go to hell. It's all about her, learning to be a good housewife. Her mother is always intent on her, cooking and cleaning skills and all of that stuff. Like our family is far away from that. However, we grew up knowing such people all around us. So I think for me and my sister, it kind of was extremely hilarious and funny that we could sort of laugh at the people that we knew, and kind of also see the sort of stark contrast between those people that were now depicted in this movie versus our own family. And to be honest, feel kind of blessed about that. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of sort of, fun stuff that happens as a result of that. It's pretty hilarious. And as time has gone by, my sister, she sort of has had this amazing career arc of always being true to her dreams and passions. She went to fashion school after regular school and became a fashion designer. Through that, met French people and started to learn French and got exposed to French food, and then ended up finding a career in baking and now has her own baking business. And it's sort of amazing to see the parallels, if you will, of the main character of Bend It Like Beckham, regardless of where she comes from and what obstacles she might have, she ends up sort of discovering this great passion and making something of her. And a big part of that really is the support from her father. And I think in our case, both of our parents were super supportive to my sister and let her kind of find her dreams and make him. But at the same time, it's not lost on us that the cost of that for parents is pretty significant, especially in a place like India. For a girl, there aren't that many examples of people, leaving, excuse me, your regular job and, finding the path to entrepreneurship, that too in a space like food. So which is pretty risky and anything can happen. So I don't know, lots of parallels in that sense as well. So yeah, it doesn't take much for me to watch a few minutes of this movie and get transported back to thinking about my sister, laughing at these people or at and with these people, but also reveling in our own joy of the life that we had thanks to our parents. Have you watched this movie, Alex?
I have, yeah. I really like this movie a lot. I remember seeing it on video rental. So I didn't see this in the theaters, but I did really like the film, and it's interesting because a lot of what you're saying in terms of how it resonated with you, it hit me in the same ways, especially around this is a genre of film. There's a lot of stories like this of traditional family, untraditional person in that family trying to then break away from tradition and how the family deals with that. That's a whole genre, and this is a great representation of that. And I have not had that experience either myself. I mean, my parents didn't put any expectations on myself or my siblings. They were supportive of anything we wanted to do, no matter whether it was offbeat or traditional or what have you. So whenever a time I'd see these movies or these tales, this movie included, I would get that same reaction of like, oh, I'm blessed to not having had to deal with this, which is something that I do know people that had to go through those things, and it's very difficult and very hard. And I think this movie, in that, if there were a genre, I don't know what you call it, if there was a genre, this would be one of my favorite movies in that genre. I think it's super charming. I'm a huge Keira Knightley fan. This was the movie that really started my interest in her as an actress. I think she does a fantastic job. It's a great family film too. I feel like really adds in some some other layers that aren't typically in this type of genre film too. There's a sports angle, there's the multicultural angle. It really does try to tackle a lot of things and does them all really well. You kind of put this movie in a lot of different categories. I think it does a fantastic job of accomplishing all those things. It's a really charming film. I like it a lot.
I'm happy to hear that. Okay, so I think we are coming to close to our top spot.
Yep. This is start with my number two. This is also a film that was panned at the time. So maybe, I don't know why my list so far has been bad movies. That's not to say I have a bad relationship with my siblings or anything. This is a 1996's Jingle All the Way, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sinbad, Phil Hartman, and a pre-Anakin Skywalker Jake Lloyd. The IMDb summary is: a father vows to get his son a Turbo Man action figure for Christmas. However, every store is sold out of them, and he must travel all over town and compete with everybody else in order to find one. So this film was, myself and both my sisters were huge Arnold Schwarzenegger fans. We loved all of his films, both comedies and action films. This was the end of his family comedy. This movie bombed really poorly, and it ended that part of his career. But this is a movie that we, growing up, this is pre-streaming, obviously. We would go to the video store a lot as a family, or as the three of us, and pick out what movies we wanted to rent. And this was one that we, again, did not see in the theater. and it was Arnold, and we love Sinbad as well. So okay, let's kind of rent this and bring it home and see if this is any good. And we just think the movie's hilarious. We love Sinbad, and he does a great job in this film. Phil Hartman's amazing. It was something we found very, very funny. And again, I think it's interesting looking back at this film and the previous one that I mentioned, that it was the sense of humor that really helped bond the three of us together. Again, probably more shaped by the TV shows we watched, kind of develop that sense of humor, but we could find that in various films as well. And this is one that we all, comedy and laughter is something that really bonds people together. In this film, we'll still, again, quote it to each other. I don't typically watch this by myself, but when we get together, in the holidays, it's one of those movies that's on the Christmas rotation. I'm not saying it's every year, but it definitely is in there. And it really, I think, speaks to us and our, this sense that we have of, yeah, we'll like what we like. We're not ashamed of it. We're not going to kind of go with what's popular, or, oh, everyone hates this movie. Okay, then we're not going to see it. Or this bombs, so let's avoid it. It's like, no, we're going to check out the movies that we like, of the people that we like. Arnold, Sinbad. And if we like it, great. We're not ashamed to admit it. Like I admit to people I like Jingle All the Way. Whenever it comes up and gets disparaged because, it's a butt of a lot of jokes, I'm like, no, I actually enjoy that movie. Though, when I go back and watch it more as an adult, even though I was a teen when I watched it before, the message of the movie is not great or very muddled. It comes at this approach of, okay, well, it's like anti-commercialism and consumption, because it's showing the downsides of chasing down a toy to show love to the kid. But then at the end of the movie, Arnold turns into the character of the toy that his son wants to get, and then saves him. So he becomes the action figure to kind of save him. I'm like, I don't know what kind of message that really shows. So it's not like this movie represents the Christmas spirit or anything like that. But it really is something that, again, like all three of us really enjoy this film, and it's something that we can say we like, and we don't really care that other people disparage it. So
that's hilarious.
Have you seen this film?
Oh yeah, it's been a while since I saw it, but yeah, we saw it at home too. Both me and my sister, probably my mom joining as well. I don't remember much from the movie other than just Arnold Schwarzenegger and the toy and just being, we watched it at an age where I don't think we were doing a whole bunch of analysis of whether this message is right or wrong, or is there even a message. I probably should go back and watch it again. But as kids, and especially growing up in a place where the Christmas sort of festivity spirit and such wasn't really represented, at least at that time, in pop culture or even around us, these movies really was sort of our gateway into what it feels like when Christmas rolls around the corner. And everything looks beautiful and people are happy, but they're also kind of tense. And so that's sort of what this movie represents to us. But definitely this whole Arnold Schwarzenegger action hero to comedy star turn, I think we all followed that pretty closely. And we're largely pretty big fans of it, honestly. So I don't know, maybe I should go and watch this movie again to truly understand what the disparaging comments and such are, because I don't, in my mind this movie is pretty fun. But yeah, that's the 12-year-old or whatever 14-year-old in me talking.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, this, unlike Clifford, which I will defend as a good movie, this one I will not defend it as a movie. I will just say that I enjoyed it, and it's something that my siblings and all like. So yeah, definitely go back and rewatch it, but don't expect Citizen Kane.
No.
Great. So I think we're at year number 1. I'm really curious to hear what this is.
Yeah. Okay. So my number 1 pick for our list of the movies that shape our relationship with our siblings is The Remains of the Day. It's from 1993, a James Ivory directed movie, a Merchant Ivory production. And the synopsis is a butler who sacrificed body and soul to service in the years leading up to World War II realizes too late how misguided his loyalty was to his lordly employer. Starring Emma Thompson, Anthony Hopkins, Christopher Reeves. So this movie, unlike the 2 movies I picked, where Mary Poppins sort of represents our childhood, Benedict Beckham represents maybe our teenage years, this movie is sort of an adult movie, which I had seen before, but my sister and I watched it together maybe 3 or 4 years ago when she was visiting me in Seattle. And I really want to show this movie to her and kind of get her reactions, because we've been talking, living in different parts of the world, about our movie tastes and how they were evolving and growing. And I sort of saw her really develop into somebody who likes movies that are deeper and serious and, appreciates good storytelling. So I was very curious to see how she responds to this movie, and she absolutely loved it. And over the years, but I think it started at this movie that it turned her into a period piece film lover, which I have been for a very long time. So it's sort of become like a new shared passion of ours. This movie weirdly also became a gateway for her into Jane Austen. So she then sort of, even though this movie is kind of not that, but because it's a British period piece, in our minds, they kind of fall in this, they're cut from the same cloth, if you will, in some ways. So she, went and watched all the movies, and I don't know if she's watched the BBC miniseries, which I think we should watch at some point, which are arguably better. But it kind of became like a new bond between us about these complex characters, living in this time of British history where the class system and the divide between the two and such really is interwoven into how their lives pan out. When you are born and you grow up in India, the shadow, if you will, of British colonialism looms large. Whether it's in the historic buildings around you, the history books that you read, or this kind of weird juxtaposition of admiration for that society and that culture, but also you disparage them at the same time. It's sort of what colonialism, I suppose, does. So we've obviously grown up with that, and have a lot of regard and appreciation for just British culture and British things and British countryside and all of that. So I think this movie captures a lot of that as well. It's and the whole class struggle is very much part of the fabric of the movie, because Anthony Hopkins is this lifelong devoted butler, to the point that he's so loyal to his household that even though he has this great connection with Emma Thompson's character, who's kind of the head housekeeper, he never gets to a place of really even acknowledging the love that he has for her. And it's sort of so painful as you see these two characters grow older in their life. So there's something very romantic and charming about that kind of long lost love, which I think also bonded the two of us. And then, we also, I feel like, see a little bit of a parallel to our lives with this movie, because my dad, growing up in the army, we had a lot of kind of upstairs, downstairs sort of living. And as my dad sort of, grew in the rank, and especially when you get to a general title, there's a lot of that stuff in your life. And, every now and then we would go downstairs, if you will, and get a peek into the lives of the folks who were supporting the household. And many of those folks actually grew up with us because they were such parts of the family. So when we moved from one place to the other, they came along with us. So I think we also kind of felt that collective bond with this movie of, these people who are supporting the household, who can often be invisible to us as kids and as a family, were very much part of our household. In fact, the household and our private lives and such couldn't really run if these folks were not really a part of it, and we celebrated holidays and such all together and such. So I think there were those elements that spoke to us as well. And since then, I've become a huge Merchant Ivory production fan. It's kind of cool to see that this kind of brash South Asian Ismail Merchant with this very suave and kind of laid back and almost introverted James Ivory coming together and making these movies in the 80s on shoestring budgets with these, big, huge stars tackling, massive, literally subjects from England. None of them are from there. that sort of has really impressed me as well. And a lot of the movies are amazing, and this is definitely in the top. So yeah, that's my number one, Remains of the Day.
Oh, yeah. So this, I am a fan of Merchant Ivory. This is one of the few I have not seen of their productions. Um, Interesting too, just as you're getting into some of that background on why this film, just thinking back to your other two films you mentioned, all three of them are British stories. I just think that's kind
I
of
didn't even
interesting.
think about that.
I
That's
mean, now they're
crazy.
not all British films. To your point, Merchant
Yeah,
Ivory, not British. Disney, obviously, Walt Disney was not, though the author of Mary Poppins was. But just interesting to see that it was through the not to be a pop psychologist here, but through this lens of British stories that those are the films that you happen to gravitate to from when thinking of your sister and your childhood. I also have a question on what you mentioned. This was a film you wanted to get her take on and her to see, and what was it specifically where you're like, oh, I really want her to experience this movie. I want to experience it together with her. Like, what was it about this particular film?
I think it was all these themes of the class system stuff that we talked about, the upstairs, downstairs stuff. And then just that we'd been talking a lot about the movies that we were watching. And I really appreciated, her analysis of characters and the psychology and the filmmaking and performances and such that, when we got together after however much time had passed, I just felt that this would be a great movie that kind of summed up all of those pieces. And that's why I wanted to get her reactions. Yeah.
Well, that's great too that you were able to open up another world for her in terms of again Jane Austen and this period film genre, which is a favorite of mine as well. Again, embarrassing that this is a film I have not seen in that genre, but that cool that was able to open that door for her and you were able to help her experience something that you had loved as well.
Yeah. Now, super excited about that. And yeah, these movies are great. And I'm so happy that, my sister is in many ways like my best friend. And we share so many loves between music and food and such. And it's been awesome that she's turned into a big movie person as well, because that may not have happened. And in many ways, my list is kind of, I feel like counting through my progression of appreciation for movies. And it's great to have had a partner and a friend like my sister in that journey. So, with that, what is your number one?
Great. So interesting how your list, you were saying like evolved. So my list, while both of those other films that I mentioned were later on, now I want to actually jump back to earlier on. And that film is Back to the Future from 1985. The IMDb summary: Marty McFly, a 17-year-old high school student, is accidentally sent 30 years into the past in a time-traveling DeLorean invented by his close friend, the eccentric scientist Doc Brown. So this is directed by Robert Zemeckis, Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Crispin Glover. This is one of those films where I don't remember when I first saw it, much like Mary Poppins, it was always there. It was always something that was on television. The three of us would watch it. We rented it at the video store all the time. Especially when we wanted to watch like a trilogy, we'd rent all three of them and watch. And this is a movie that all three of us, both of my sisters are big media fans, raised on cable TV just like I was, movies. We all three of us love this trilogy. Even now, talk about it all the time. My sisters came out and visited me in California after I graduated college 15 years ago, and we did a self-guided tour around all the filming locations. We saw like Doc Brown's house, Marty McFly's house, the mall where the machine went back in time, all those things. We get each other gifts at Christmas. I got my sister a copy of the Sports Almanac, and she bought me one of the Pepsis from 2015, of the Pepsi Perfects. So we definitely have that bond. And it was interesting thinking back to like why this film and why this is the one that I really would think is probably the one that I share the most bond with my sisters. And it's interesting because as I was thinking about this, okay, yes, we all were we grew up on TV, fans of movie and media, but we grew up in the 80s. And the 80s was a time where definitely media, at least in the States, was very gendered. There
Mhm.
was kids shows for boys and kids shows for girls and kids movies for girls and kids movies for boys. I mean, you could even trace that back to change in regulations in the 80s, which allowed for TV shows, especially, just to basically become advertisements for toys. They weren't allowed to sell before, and now they were. So toys were always in the States incredibly genderized. You walk into a toy store, there's the boy section, there's the girl section.
Mhm.
Now television, which before was about entertaining children and trying to get the biggest audience, well, now they had to sell toys, so therefore it started bifurcating. But this was a movie and a story that wasn't really genderized in any way. Like, boys loved it, girls loved it. There wasn't that sense that it was a boys movie or a girls movie. And this is something, especially when you're very young, under 10 or so, like, that is how you look at the world, or at least it was in the States and suburban America, where there's things that, you can't really like My Little Ponies, or you can't really, if you're a man, you can't really like G.I. Joe if you're a girl. And this movie was very gender neutral. And I think that is probably one of the reasons why all three of us were exposed to it, loved it. I mean, again, it's also a perfect movie. I'm not saying that, it's one of the few films that I would consider actually perfect. There's very few I find flawless. Would be one of those. But, as I was thinking about this, it was something that, like, I have younger sisters. I don't have a brother. I've never had a brother. So there are definitely things where I couldn't share a lot of my loves with, even with films. I loved Star Wars. They liked it, but they weren't really into it. Comic books, that wasn't really their thing, but they had each other. But this is a way I could help bridge that, gender gap, if you will, and enjoy media just as much as they could. And we had that shared love in the same way. And that was Back to the Future, which, again, I'm sure you've seen, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to be honest, like, if my sister and I would have watched this movie together, this probably would be on my list as well somewhere, because it's such an amazing movie. And even though the two of us have watched it separately, we have talked about it together because it definitely spoke to us. That's really interesting, the whole gender piece that you talked about. I think there was some of that in India too, but I didn't feel it to that kind of degree. For us, I think, as she and I have talked about this movie, it's been just more about the fascination of time travel. Like, it's one of the coolest concepts, and maybe it's worth diving into history. Maybe you already know this, like, what started the time travel genre. Maybe there were books, or is this just purely a movie creation? But I'm instantly in, and my sister too, whenever there's like a time travel situation. And in this case, like, this is probably one of the best ways in which this thing has been handled. So yeah, a huge fan of the movie and the whole series. What a great pick. So gosh, that's it. That's our top three.
Before jumping into the ones that didn't make it, I just have an interesting observation as I thought through my list, actually, as I was talking it through and hearing your list as well. Interestingly, all of the movies we chose in the top three were movies that we didn't see in theaters with our siblings. It was on video at home, on DVD or on television. Just interesting that I guess that maybe speaks to that medium of home video being where you can control it more. You choose kind of what you can expose yourself to it a lot more often. You're there with that person. It's more of a communal experience than in a theater. While there is a communal experience to it as well, there is also a very solitary experience because it's in the dark. It's quiet. You can't say, "Oh my God, that was so funny," and have your siblings say something back to you. So I just wonder if there is something to that, where the bonds that are forged between siblings, at least, are probably more so on home video than in theaters. Just interesting that both of us kind of chose films like that.
I think that there's something to that, definitely, because this is also somebody with whom you are living with, right? So in some ways, bringing media and movies into that same space that you are living together with and sharing all these experiences sort of further adds to that, as opposed to leaving home and going somewhere else. Like, I probably would have more movies that I've watched in theaters with, say, friends, that would happen because that's a different experience altogether, like going with them versus with your sibling. It's a little bit different. So yeah, I think there's something to that for sure. The other observation that I felt in sort of comparing and contrasting our list was that your list seems to me very sort of centered around this bond around your unique sense of humor with your siblings, which I think is really cool. And for listeners, I had, the pleasure to meet Alex's sisters a little bit, of course, at Alex's wedding, but then last year during the pandemic when I was in New York, Alex was in Boston, and I got a chance to go over there, and we basically rented out a whole movie theater and watched Tenant together with Alex, his wife, and his sisters, and his brother-in-law, and that was such a cool experience. And I can see why humor is that cornerstone of the bond that you guys have, because not that we hung out for a very long time, but I could tell that there were lots of sort of insider jokes and such that were, between the three of you. And I've known you for a while, and it was fun to meet them and also feel a sense of connection to them. And I think humor is a big part of that. Yeah, curious if you had any reflections on my list, because you got a chance to meet my sister as well.
Yes, no, I did when I visited your folks in India a couple years back. Yeah, it was interesting. Other than the observation, like I said, around home video being that for you guys as well, and then the interesting note around the British stories. It was interesting to hear, as you said, like your relationship was evolving through the different films that you had mentioned, and how a lot of it seemed to be reflections on your childhood in a way, like experiences that you shared that then were reflected in the movies, whether it was the medicine in Mary Poppins, or the situation with not being pressured from your folks on being a traditional family, and then obviously remains of the day with the upstairs downstairs memories that you shared. So it's almost like you created these bonds with each other, and then saw those things reflected in the media, and that's kind of how your list was created. So like those same experiences together that you guys had, which I really enjoyed. Meeting your sister was really fun. We went out to eat, which was really cool too, and hope to head back and visit again sometime soon over in India when this pandemic is all over.
Yeah, that would be fun. All right. So before we sign off, any movies that didn't make your list?
Yeah, there were a couple. Again, back in that home video frame, only one of them actually I saw in theaters with my sisters for the first time. So these are a lot of bigger, more in the vein of like the Back to the Future, bigger Hollywood kind of blockbusters. Die Hard, Ghostbusters, Jaws. Heavy. Those were all in heavy rotation growing up. We all love those films. Another comedy, Heavyweights, teen comedy, or I guess family comedy, and then Newsies, the Disney musical, that was again a bomb at the time, but we all three of us have a bond for that. What about you? What were the ones that you didn't make the cut?
That's awesome. Yeah, I almost had like movies for each of my kind of three, framework topics. So, for the first one, like I could have chosen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, a sort of music, but Mary Poppins kind of really stuck out. For kind of the middle years of kind of growing up and, feeling out our relationship with our family and such, there was obviously Bennett like Beckham that I ended up choosing, but there were other movies that were sort of more smaller, sort of indie Bollywood movies, which are so esoteric. Then I just felt like that probably may not be the best route to go. And then for the third one, Sense and Sensibility has kind of become our favorite Jane Austen. So I almost put that, but then I was like, let me go back and pick the one which started it all. And that's why Remains of the Day came in there. So yeah, it was really fun to actually get to know your sisters a little bit better through these movies. But listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and learned something about yourself today, or at the very least, have some new movies to check out, or perhaps revisit some old favorites. So that's really our episode. Goodbye, folks.
Bye.